First of all, we have Jim Miklashevsky at the Pentagon, as well as Deborah Hersman, the former head of the NTSB, Michael Leiter, and our friend Bob Hager, our longtime transportation expert. Mick, first to you. Today already at the United Nations, we heard Samantha Power saying categorically that this was a SAM missile coming from Russian-supported separatist eastern Ukraine. The president repeating that information. That is basically what U.S. intelligence has been telling you. They still do not know exactly who fired it, but it's very clear that there are Russian fingerprints all over this weaponry.
That's right, Andrea. You know, we were told early this morning by U.S. officials that there is hard evidence that this missile was fired inside Ukraine, just inside the Russian border. But they still, as of today, don't know exactly who pulled the trigger. Now, what the intelligence has told them over the past several weeks, as the Russians have poured heavy artillery, tanks, and yes, some of these SAM missile launchers into Ukraine, they obviously need some Russian advisors and trainers to teach these separatists how to use these weapons. And we're told that in many cases, there are Russian military forces embedded with this separatist force, because we were all wondering, well, if you know it's coming from Ukraine, why can't you tell if it was Russians or if it was the separatists at the controls? And they can't, because there's this crossover between the separatists and the Russian trainers and advisors. And there's a suspicion, a deep suspicion, but no proof yet, that it could have been a Russian at those controls who pulled the trigger that shot down the plane.
And I wanted to play a little excerpt, a brief excerpt of the ambassador, Samantha Power. This was one of those iconic moments at the UN Security Council where she made the case of the cover-up by the Russian supporters.
On July 14th, separatists claimed credit for the downing of a Ukrainian military cargo plane flying at 6,000 meters, and on July 16th, they claimed credit for the downing of a Ukrainian fighter jet. If indeed Russian-backed separatists were behind this attack on a civilian airliner, they and their backers would have good reason to cover up evidence of their crime.
Chuck Todd, the president had not come out except for just a brief moment in between his other events yesterday. This was a much more striking appearance by the president, trying to sort of get ahead of what has been a devastating series of crises on their plate.
It was, but I'm glad you played that clip from Samantha Power, our United States ambassador to the UN, because what I found striking is that she had, in some ways, used even stronger language, pointing the finger at the Russians than even the president did. The president seemed to use similar language but offer more caveats on sort of responsibility for this catastrophe that took place there. And I think that to read between the lines in there, Andrea, and I think you know this well, it's clear I think the United States doesn't yet know what is the next response going to be to hold Putin accountable. Obviously, when he says that for Europe there should be a wake-up call, it is about getting the European allies more involved here in some form that makes it so that Putin feels the consequence, because nothing has worked so far other than changing the tone of his language, not his actions.
And it could be as well that the president, while not knowing what policy choices they have, also wants to preserve the relationship so that they can continue to communicate with Moscow. Joining me here at the table. Yeah,
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. They looking for it. No. They seem to be trying to see if they can hand him an off-ramp. It really felt, honestly, like a good cop, bad cop routine, where Power was tough at the UN, and the president, pulled a few of his punches, almost basically saying to Putin, okay, you got one last chance here to do the right thing.
And Michael Leiter, the intelligence is clearly there. They don't know who fired the trigger, as it were, but they know the kind of missile battery this was. They know as much as they need to know in terms of the ground location. And as Jim Miklashevsky had been pointing out all day, there are Russian advisors and trainers embedded with those separatists.
Absolutely. There are still unknowns here, but I don't think those unknowns are all that dispositive about what the next step will be. Exactly how deeply involved the Russians, sure, that's meaningful, but ultimately the Russians provided a weapon system to their allies in the Ukraine, and out of that area a civilian airliner was shot down and 200 plus were killed. Those are pretty clear facts. Nothing in the intelligence is going to change that in a significant way. It's simply going to be on the edges.
And what Samantha Power also said at the UN today was that while Kiev has that kind of SAM system, they have not used it. The separatists have. Joining us now as well, Deborah Hersman by Skype, the former head, of course, of the NTSB. Investigators are heading to the region. We know that the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, are the first responders, but the FBI and NTSB is also heading to Ukraine. But how safe is it? This is an area where the separatists have kidnapped OSCE observers and monitors in the past.
Well, I can tell you one of my first priorities if I was sitting in the chair would be to make sure that if you're sending your people into harm's way, that they have guarantees for protection. And so I think it will be important to understand what's happening on the ground and making sure that those sites are secure. But the world is watching now, and I think that helps them.
Although, as we can see from this 6-mile wide or 6-mile square debris field, it's already been contaminated. There are people, there are separatists, there are people who unintentionally or not may have contaminated this. And there's a question as to where the black boxes are. How dispositive in a case like this would the black boxes be? Because they would tell you, I guess, altitude and speed, but we sort of know the track of the plane. We just don't know who fired that missile.
That's right. I think there are going to be different parts of this investigation that are going to be important. I would say that the black boxes and the cockpit voice recorders are always important, if nothing else, to rule things out as well as ruling things in. And so you've got to have all of the information on the table to really accurately identify what happened here. And I think we're still in the early phases where a lot of conflicting information is out there. And so we've got to give them time to put the pieces together.